Let me introduce our wonderful speaker. We're so fortunate to have Sam Coffman. He is a returning fan favorite speaker. Please join me in welcoming Sam back to Wild Med Wednesday. I promise you're in for a great lecture tonight. Sam began his medical education in the US Army as a Green Beret Medic 18D in 1989. Not to date you or anything over there, Sam. Over the years that followed, he dedicated himself to being able to work with botanical medicine as a successful method to provide sustainable healthcare in remote and post-disaster regions for chronic, acute, and physical trauma care. Since that time, Sam has taught herbalism for over 30 years, and he has worked as a clinical herbalist for over 15 years. His herbal and acupuncture clinic apothecary are now located in, I'm going to butcher this, Taos, New Mexico. Please don't hold that against me, people. Along with his school. In 2007, Sam founded Herbal Medics Academy, aka the Human Path. I'm sure you all have heard of that, which offers 5 primary herbalism programs: clinical herbalism, austere medicine, advanced medicine making, community herbalism, and family herbalism. He teaches the integration of herbal medicine with botanical functional medicine, and austere medicine, together with 2 medical doctors who also specialize in those areas. In 2007, Sam founded, Sam and his wife, Suchil, am I saying her name right, Sam?
Suchil.
Suchil. Also co-founded Herbal Medics in 2011, which is an outreach organization that gives their students and interns an opportunity to work in the field while providing free healthcare and education to underserved communities. They have worked in Nicaragua, Mexico, and all over the US to provide post-disaster relief, as well as provide free herbal clinics, education, and sustainable medicine food projects for underserved communities. Sam is currently the training director for Taos Search and Rescue, and is also part of the Canine Search and Rescue team, together with his canine companion, Lucy. His book, Herbal Medicine, has been the top 3 bestseller books for Story Publishing for the past several years. He will be giving away a copy of this book to 1 live attendee tonight. So whoever that lucky person is, we're all jealous already.
Yeah, and I apologize, everybody, if I may have a little bit of a lag. I'm running off my phone as a hotspot. I'm in the hill country of Texas right now. We kind of got a last minute request to teach a WFR out here. It's a place called the Sovereignty Ranch. Very beautiful location and wonderful, but my Wi-Fi is horrible. So hopefully there won't be any problems with that. If there are and I lose connection, of course, I'll log right back in. But so far, everything's been okay. Other than I can tell there's definitely a lag going on for me. So my apologies. Probably you'll hear me about 4 or 5 seconds after whatever it is I say. So anyway, yeah, thanks for having me. It's great to be back and to talk a little bit. As already been mentioned, I started my medical career really as in the military medicine, specifically as a special forces medic, which is, I always kind of say, from my perspective, it's kind of the cross between like a combat paramedic on one side and on the other side, sort of a meatball nurse practitioner course. So the idea was to be able to be, at the time I went through anyway, to be competent in an austere setting for pretty much everything, a very generalist kind of education, obviously very focused in many ways on trauma, but also very, able to do anything. One day you might have to deliver a baby, then the next day it might be a broken limb or a flu outbreak or whatever. And the idea behind that was to have a 12-man special forces team to be able to create about a battalion-sized force out of insurgency or counterinsurgent forces. This was based off the Vietnam model, and at the time I came through, that was still the educational model. It shifted away from that during the Middle East War and now, or wars, and now it's kind of coming back to that. They're calling it prolonged field care now, but that's essentially it. So in that process, I grew up in a very plant literate family, and I was always interested in herbal medicine. And even at the time I was on Special Forces team, I was already using herbs, and even prior to that, I was working with herbs. And in my book, I talk about how I had a broken thumb during what's called goat lab, which is easily the most difficult portion of the Q course for medics. And I was able to heal that using herbs and get through without any recycles or anything like that, which was very important to me because I was away from my son at the time. I was trying to be, a competent father at the same time. I was gone all the time in the military. So anyway, I guess to that was when I realized how effective herbal medicine is, and we're starting to come around to that. Again, I think full circle. I'm right now working with the founder of the College of Offshore and Remote Medicine in Europe, COROM. That's Abra Kokeli, and we're going to be presenting a JSOM, a Joint Special Operations Medicine conference next May together on some of my favorite subjects, which are wound healing, wound and infection management in the field using herbal medicine, biofilm inhibition and biofilm management using herbs, and some other topics like that are field or field austere medicine type topics. This is a sustainable solution, and I think Special Forces is starting to kind of come around on that because, at least from my perspective, I'm starting to get a lot of attention in that regard, and I think it's nice, to see that finally coming around. Tonight is we're talking about really traveler's diarrhea, and so let's go ahead and move to the next slide, and let's see what I've got here. Traveler's diarrhea, GI bugs. So this is seen from with both herbs and, of course, pharmaceutical medicine as in terms of in regards to organ systems, right? Whether respiratory or GI or urinary tract or integumentary or whatever it may be. And so this is really more of an acute care type approach. I also have a master's of science in acupuncture and renal medicine. I'm a licensed acupuncturist, but so I work with traditional Chinese medicine and even classical Chinese medicine, which is, I think, a more fitting for a thing like chronic illness and chronic disease, and more complicated medical situations where we're working with things like endocrine disorders or autoinflammation or perimenopausal shifts in life and so forth, where we have hormonal shifts. Those are going to be more effective, I think, from that standpoint. But as opposed to herbal medicine, where you're kind of playing whack-a-mole with symptoms in a system that was really designed for pharmaceutical medicine, right? I mean, it was really based upon our allopathic language of pathophysiology is based upon, you could even say, reverse engineered almost from how our pharmaceuticals work, right? I got into med school when I was 42, and I had to leave. I had to choose between family or medicine, do some financial stuff. But that was when it really dawned on me that that's what the language of medicine was, and it didn't really fit the language of herbs so much. But tonight, in terms of what we're talking about, I think that the two worlds are they integrate conditions very well, and of course pharmaceuticals as well. And I would never say that we're using one in lieu of the other per se. It's just more a matter of having a bigger toolbox to work from, because herbal medicine is usually more sustainable. We can usually get it if we know what we're doing. It's something that we can fill in with if we don't have pharmaceuticals, for instance, or there may be times where the pharmaceuticals really are not fitting for that due to interactions, drug interactions, due to reactions in general, allergic reactions, whatever it may be. Or we just our bodies may be more prone to heal better if we can support the tissue as opposed to just trying to nuke the bug sometimes, depending again on what the bug is. Okay. So with that said, what we're talking about here more again is more like, go back, I'm sorry to the last slide. What we're talking about here more again is more travelers. So travelers diarrhea, we will get into invasive versus non-invasive a little bit here, but we're talking really more about non-invasive type of GI, gastrointestinal, infection, whether it's bacterial, maybe even viral possibly, possibly even protozoal. But where we can kind of make a distinction as well and look at red flags as to whether or not we do have an invasive pathogen that is actually disrupting the gut and usually the large intestine versus being something that's just causing we all know this obviously already. Food and water contamination, poor hygiene. So fecal oral is usually going to be a big part of how we're being infected. And then microbiome, the balance is overlooked a lot of times, but the microbiome in the gut. Okay, thank you. Next slide. Okay, so common causative agents, bacterial, is generally, is the majority of the time what we're talking about, and E. coli being a big part of this, of course. We have some in the Shigella and Salmonella that are going to be more invasive. In this case, I just got done saying probably when we talk travelers diarrhea, we're speaking maybe more non-invasive, but that doesn't necessarily mean less dangerous or less fatal. Or less, less of a morbidity. For instance, if we were talking about, non-invasive, we could even talk about well, we'll get to it. I'm sorry. Let's go ahead and move forward to the next slide. I don't want to jump ahead here. Viral, meaning noroviruses, rotaviruses. Yeah, it's very common that we might see something like that. And here we're not talking about something like Hep A or something more where we especially might have a much longer incubation period too before we're having to deal with it. But this is something more that's going to happen within days generally that we're going to start to get a reaction and symptoms. Okay, next slide. Okay, so protozoan, Giardia, which also can have a longer, of course, a longer incubation phase as well. More dangerous as well over time, especially not dealt with, but we'll get into that a little bit as well. And okay, so here going back again to invasive versus non-invasive. So in disruption of intestinal epithelial cells and impaired absorption is really the issue with the non-invasive, where we're having an increased secretion of fluid, and we're having immense fluid loss, right? Enterotoxins as well, which are going to cause problems of their own, obviously, as well. And then invasive pathogens are going to be, like I mentioned before, Shigella and Salmonella, where we're going to have, possibly bloody stool. We're probably going to have systemic signs, fever, malaise. And so the treatment generally will be different depending on what we're showing as symptoms in this regard. And we'll get to that here also in a minute. And then protozoan as well, being able to, which are damaging and are invasive and not only damaging the small intestine, but also the prolonged symptoms of malabsorption over time. Okay, next slide. Okay, so clinical presentation, right? And I've got a table here. I think this next slide, where we can kind of compare a little bit. But watery or loose stools, obviously, abdominal cramps, nausea and vomiting, low-grade fever, malaise, dehydration. And then again, red flags are going to be blood and stool, persistent fever, and mass every maybe a different type of treatment than just looking at more oral rehydration and doing what we can to minimize the diarrhea as much as possible. If we're getting an invasive, if we're dealing with more of an invasive type of pathogen, we want to flush those toxins more. We don't necessarily want to stop all the diarrhea. As much as we have to deal with the fluid loss, we still also have to deal with the fact that our body needs to get rid of those toxins. Okay, next slide. Okay, here we go. So this is probably a better one to just kind of sit and look through and get an idea of, our transmission source, where we're getting it from, obviously, the onset, the stool, what our stool type's going to look like, and the symptomology of it. And then, of course, the area of the world that you're in as well will even indicate, or will rather determine what especially what pharmaceutical may be indicated. in terms of resistance, for instance, for instance, Asia and resistance to certain antibiotics over there, like Cipro. So we're going to have to take that into account as well, right? For those of you that are maybe working or having something to do with maybe expeditionary medicine, for instance, or if you're doing any kind of clinics in underserved areas around the world, these are things to bear in mind to kind of understand the epidemiology of the area that you're going to be working in, and also that will play a big role in what your pharma is going to look like probably as well. Okay, next slide. Prevent, it's at the top of our list. Always, right? Especially in the field, especially in austere conditions and in expeditionary, backpacking trips, whatever. Prevent more than anything. I want to talk a little bit about water purification here coming up too. But the idea here, basically, if we're in a foreign country, especially, and we're not familiar with the food anyway, our digestive tract may already be responding to that. We want to be able to eat something that then boil it, or to be able to cook it basically, or be able to peel it. And then obviously hygiene plays a huge role. A lot of people forget about ice cubes as being a place where we can certainly pick it up as well. Salads and produce can be a big thing. Street food, it doesn't have to be street food. I mean, the times I've gotten incredibly sick from very fancy restaurants in Costa Rica, like really nice restaurants. I've gotten food poisoning from. But I've also we worked with the Rama Indians in eastern Nicaragua, doing slow sand water filtration for them, and doing free herbal clinics for them in like 100 miles from the nearest road. You could only get to by river. And we did a really, really kind of intense project with them. And at the end of it, they wanted to kind of give us a celebratory, send off. And so they had this really great dinner that they'd made. Iguana, and it was interesting because these are hunter-gatherer tribe, right? I mean, they in the tribe, and they're like, we're going to get some. They basically turned around to them, so asked. I think they asked me. He said, "Do you like iguana?" And I look, I don't think I've ever had iguana. And they turn around to their boys and say, "Go get some." And so that was a big cook, and I ended up getting salmonella from that, probably from the skin. And I wasn't as careful as I should have been myself. They cook it with the skin and the skin is on your plate, and so I remember being very sick from that. I'll talk a little bit more about some of the things that I've done for different, uh, um, gastrointestinal infections over the past, and that included, that might help as we get to a couple other slides here. Probiotics are great. We can work with probiotics. They take longer, obviously. They're not going to be a cure to what's going on generally through the acute symptomology, but they are going to certainly help over time as well. And prebiotics, not during the infection generally, but to recover from prebiotics, we should consider as well. There's some interesting research out there about Pepto-Bismol as a prophylactic, and being very effective as well. So that's kind of interesting. I have never worked with it myself that way, but I thought the research was really interesting, so I thought I'd point that out as well. Okay, next slide, please. Okay, so let's talk just a little bit about water filters. I know that most of you probably that are here, if you're doing FOM credits, you're probably interested in, and you probably already have your own favorite some water filters. So for me, having been in a lot of places where the water, and in fact, we do a lot of water filtration projects. Hold on a second. Yeah, I would be happy to. I'll just turn off the camera. That may be a good suggestion. Let me do that. There we go. In case you guys are getting like really laggy, you're probably getting really laggy audio there. Okay, so where was I? I was talking about, I think that water filtration, what I kind of ended up with working best for me was having basically a kind of a three-part water filtration, the third one being more of a backup. plan B that would work for anything, but basically some sort of a particulate filtration, whether Sawyer, which I kind of like, Life Straw, not the Life Straw that you drink out of the straw, but the actual Life Straw filter is actually a little better now. It didn't used to be as good, but now it's better than Sawyer, I believe. It's more malleable. It's easier to work with. It's got a little bit bigger lid to fill from and so forth. That's the first thing I do. And the second thing I usually do is a UV pin, like a steri pin. And this works really well, even with, I've been in places where the water was literally not much better than what's in the septic fields. And you know, where the water table for is where it's a small town. Again, this was Nicaragua, where some of the worst of it has been, where the septic fields that are out there are, you know, the are barely, uh, they're really right at the water, the same as the water table. And so the water that's coming out of the tap, in one case in their clinic, smells like sewage, right? It doesn't look like sewage, but it smells like sewage. And so I've never had a problem with that. I've never had a problem with slow sand water filtration. I've never had a problem with my SteriPen and particulate filtration system that I've used. Never gotten sick off of that. But you know, everybody kind of has their own you know, choices and what they're going to prove their preferences based on what you've used. All I would say is, you know, if you have a system or you're trying to find a system, make sure and test it as much as you can, and don't be afraid to change and work with different systems as well. And that way you can see, you know, really the ease of use and convenience makes a big difference to me as well. Has a lot to do with it too. This is a partial table. Let's hit the next slide and you'll see the next chunk of filters. And so I'm not a big fan of the pump, the hand pumping. I prefer either gravity or just, you know, even with the gravity, you can just kind of push, you can squeeze and roll your, you know, like with the Sawyer and the Life Straw both, you can just kind of roll the container, you know, and push out the water through that way, or you can just hang it and let gravity do your work. The pump is just more weight, right? Um, yes, Leanne, no problem. I already turned off my camera. Uh, UV purifier. So yeah, and SteriPen. That's kind of it. The one thing about is that it's going to take power. You know, so you're going to have to charge it, and it's better, in my opinion, to use a battery for that, because in the field you may not have a way to charge it. At least that's been my experience when I'm in the field for say 2 or 3 weeks, and I'm not going to have any ability to charge, and usually don't have any, you know, depending on how much gear you're hauling with you, you may not have solar or anything like that as well with you. Okay. Okay, next slide. I finish up this table in one more slide. Yeah, here we go. So now we get into chemical. I'm not a big fan of chemical purification, but you know, it's certainly a good plan B anyway. And then of course, boiling is really my big plan B. You know, it's always have a way. We need heat. You know, if you're going to be in the field, you got to have a way to cook. You got to have a way to boil. You got to have, you know, that's part of your food and your water. You know. Okay, so I just wanted to kind of emphasize the idea of, you know, having good water filtration equipment here. Okay, so conventional pharma management, first and foremost, how do we keep people hydrated? So I mentioned earlier, I was going to talk a little bit, you know, I mentioned that invasive versus non-invasive doesn't mean that non-invasive is less deadly. We can certainly have, in the case of, for instance, cholera, you know, you're losing up to 1 liter of fluid an hour, and it's considered non-invasive. We're not actually attacking the beyond the, you know, the surface of the epithelium of the gut with cholera, and yet we can just have massive fluid loss. So we really have to be able to rehydrate. So this is difficult, right? And this is something where you're not just, especially if you're dealing with more than, you know, like let's say you have, let's say you're on an expedition with a group of hackers or something, and you know, you're on a K2 or whatever, and somebody gets sick and everybody ends up getting sick, you know, you're going to have a way to replace those electrolytes in large amounts, right? You have to be able to create your own oral rehydration solution and not just depend on concentrates or pre-made stuff. You really have to be able, it's better and easier and certainly less weight to be able to carry dried and granular forms of these things to be able to make your own. And so I think it's really important to know how to do that, at least at a very minimum. Like what are those percentages? What are those amounts to create your own oral rehydration solution, right? Okay. Anti-motility agents, very important for, again, for non-invasive. But once you start to get invasive, once we're talking about something like salmonella again, you're going to need to, you don't want to be using that. You're going to, so like Imodium, for instance, and that's why I put the note here, avoid with bloody diarrhea, high fever, an invasive pathogen. We're going to need to get rid of those toxins and not just let them sit in the large intestine. Antibiotics, obviously, too. We'll talk through it a little bit. I'm not, this is not my, definitely not my wheelhouse is pharma at all. So, anymore. So, but these, obviously I'm somewhat familiar and I've had to use pharma, and I work with docs all the time. We have 2 MDs on our faculty, and we go to the field all the time with MDs and NPs and PAs. So, we're always working with pharma as well, and side by side with herbal medicine. Okay, so yeah, this is something, again, you need to kind of understand, not just the not just the nature of whatever disease you might be working with in a certain part of the world, but what is the nature of disease resistance, or rather antibiotic resistance you're going to be facing as well, in part of your packing your kit, your med kits. Okay, next slide. Nutritional support, of course, the famous brat diet: bananas, rice, applesauce, toast. This is fairly self-explanatory even at this point. Most people know all of this stuff really well, what you're going to avoid. And then, of course, trying to support the microbiome as we recover, obviously, as well. And trying to support the intake of minerals and electrolytes as much as possible also. Okay, next slide. Okay, so activated charcoal, I can't speak highly enough from. I think that it is, especially in the case of food poisoning, especially in case of non-invasive type of, and even invasive, where we have toxins, charcoal is amazing. Activated charcoal is amazing. I usually do it, so there's, like the EMS formula for it is, I think, 1 to 2 grams per kilogram, right? But that's not powdered charcoal. That would be a lot, right? Powdered charcoal is practically, excuse me, it's practically weightless. It's so light. That's I think, taking into account the form that it comes in, which is sort of a pasty form, and it's not even used that much. I don't even know, a lot of SOPs, EMS SOPs, have gotten rid of charcoal in the field. It's still used, obviously, in emergency rooms, but it is, so with activated charcoal, we have these weak hydrogen bonds that are polar solvents such as water. It's only going to form a weak bond with anything polar, whether it's acid or base or water or alcohol. But it'll let go of those polar bonds and form our carbon bonds, right? Our covalent bonds with non-polar substances, such as the debris that you're going to have of the bacterial toxins, and all of the endotoxins that are released, and as cells die, all of that, it gets picked up by the charcoal. I have turned around so many gut issues, gastrointestinal infections, using just charcoal in the field. And back to my salmonella, that was probably the main thing, that probably helped me more than anything. And it was really serious. But fortunately, I didn't have enough charcoal in route, but going back, this was leaving Nicaragua, going back into Costa Rica, and we went by river. So it took about a day to get back to the hotel room where I had a bigger stash of medical gear. And fortunately, by the time I really got sick, I had that charcoal available. But it'll also slow down the diarrhea pretty well. In fact, that's probably the biggest contraindication, especially for pediatrics, is that you can constipate somebody too much, right, with this, if you take too much. So what this dose here really is not as accurate as probably a more practical way of saying it is. I usually dose of activated charcoal, and this is usually, it can be hardwood, it can be coconut coir. Most people recommend coconut coir because it's finer for internal use, and hardwood more for external use. However, Um, the way that I normally use it is I mix 1 to 2 tablespoons with about, a half cup or so, a quarter cup to a half cup of water. And that water needs to be non-tap, or it needs to be clean water, doesn't have chlorine, doesn't have fluoride or anything else that charcoal is going to stick to. And then drinking it that way. And it's no problem to drink it. It doesn't have a bad taste to it or anything like that. Greg says, I have been told it was removed for a few reasons. One, it can cause patients to vomit. Right. It does not work on all toxins. Yes, that's true. So all of those things are true. And so when we say all toxins, primarily, again, polarity plays the biggest role there. However, it is still used for things like overdoses on, for instance, Benadryl or other pharmaceuticals that are non-polar. So it absolutely will. And yes, vomiting is something to be aware of. But then again, that also depends on what you're using it for. I've never had that problem using it for food poisoning or any kind of gastrointestinal infection of it causing vomiting. However, you're right, and I haven't worked a lot in ERs. I guess I worked a lot as an SF medic in military ERs, and I remember seeing it there too, where people were coming in with drug overdoses sometimes, and you would see that happen. But whether or not that was actually related to the charcoal, I'm not sure, right? Anyway, that is a valid point. I've heard that as well, what you're saying there, Greg. Um, the one thing about it, of course, is also if you're taking it, we're talking about an acute situation here where you're going to only be taking it for a few days. But if, I know it's something that is one of those buzzword marketing things that's happened where people are, thinking that they want to take charcoal for parasite cleanse or whatever. I don't know. There's so many buzzword kind of nutraceutical and holistic health marketing claims and so forth of every, not just charcoal, but of so many things, right? Colloidal silver, you name it. And so I think that it's overdone, and some people end up thinking they should take charcoal every day. Well, if you do that, yeah, of course you're going to start becoming vitamin deficient, and you have to be really careful about the absorption, the fact that you're not going to be absorbing nutrients from your food if your charcoal's picking it up. So, and also you wouldn't take it with herbs, for instance. You wouldn't take it with anything else, because all you're going to do is dirty up the charcoal, and you're going to also block whatever the constituents are, the plant constituents of the herbs you're taking. So it kills everything off. I mean, kills, it's a mutually kind of canceling, effect that you would get from that, right? Anyway, yeah. Yeah, I'm a big fan of activated charcoal. I think you should have it in every first aid kit. It absolutely, this is beyond the scope of tonight's talk, but absolutely, I've used it for wound infections. I've used it for cellulitis when there was an opening. It's sometimes with cellulitis, you're in the field for 3 weeks and you're filthy, and some guy comes up, and, as a medic, I'll see some guy that, he scratched a bug bite, 5 days before, and you can't even see a bug bite anymore. But on his lower leg, he's got that waxy red cellulitis there, but there's no way in, right? But if you have a way in, if you have a wound, an opening that you can put the charcoal in, it's amazing. You could it's like a little micro sponge. You can pull all that crap out and clean the wound out really, really well, get rid of all the debris, and you can do it every 30 minutes. You rinse it out, you do another one, and you can literally, over the course of a few hours, start watch that tissue go from that red waxy, infected sheen to normal looking tissue. So it's pretty incredible that way too. Again, people recommend you use hardwood charcoal for that because it's a little more coarse, but the only reason there is they say, because it stains the skin. It doesn't matter. You're going to stain either way. You're going to, there's going to be charcoal that doesn't come out and clean out for, it's going to kind of take a couple days to get rid of. So I don't think the debate between fine coconut coir versus, more medium to coarse hardwood makes much of a difference, honestly, either way. I prefer the fine. I think that, the finer it is and the cleaner it is, the more adsorption we're going to get, per weight, basically, of whatever you're taking in. Okay, next slide. Okay, so now we're kind of getting more into my wheelhouse. This is what, where I thrive really is the things that we want to do. So we want to be, SC is always going to slow down diarrhea. Any astringency in an herb is going to do two things for sure, no matter what. It's always going to slow down bleeding, maybe stop bleeding. It's always going to, so it's always going to be hemostatic, and it's always going to slow down diarrhea in the gut if you're taking it internally. And these are just a few examples, but geranium maculatum, crane's-bill, I've used that so much, and I've used it for wound healing too. We use the root of that plant, and it's pretty amazing, astringent, and it's also a wound healer. It's also, there's some interesting research of it being a biofilm inhibitor as well. So it's got, it's got antibacterial qualities to it as well. Agrimony, highly, highly astringent. Green and black tea is something we can get very easily. You don't have to go out and wildcraft that in the woods somewhere. You have no idea what it looks like. You can literally use green or black tea from just a tea bag that you buy in the store, right? Blackberry root is another very common one that's used all the time for diarrhea. It's got it's got a history of centuries being used that way. Anything with tannins in it, oak is one of the big ones for that, of course, oak bark. And then theoretically, and I don't know, so I use, for urinary tract infections, one of the things with our E. coli is we have the fimbriae, right, that are attached, that are basically attachments that form between bacteria and the urothelium wall itself, and form this, kind of a biofilm, basically, especially with people with chronic UTIs. You're going to find that. And what we find is with our type A proanthocyanidins, or type A packs, which we find with cranberry, we find it with bilberry. Is that we find they are kind of like little blockers of these Velcro fimbriums. Now, will that work for the same coli that are, the enterotoxic E. coli that we're going to get in a, in a gastrointestinal infection, which are very common. I mean, it's a very common, infective pathogen. I don't know, but I throw that out there because I've had so much success working with the type A PACs for urinary tract, and I've always wondered, and I don't have enough. It's never been present in my clinical experience enough to be able to say, could you use cranberry and bilberry? Now the thing is, to get the type A PACs, you have to extract the herb in a really acidic environment, like 2.4 pH is ideal. And so that's what I do when I extract it, and then mix it in a formula and so forth with other herbs and so forth. So you're not taking a formula from me that's at that pH, but that's the pH that I extracted at. And that's kind of what you have to do ideally to get those type A PACs. So, or eat the raw cranberries. But I'm not saying cranberries and bilberries are what we should use here. I'm just saying, kind of theoretically, it's something to think about with E. coli and the nature of the pathogen of E. coli and how it acts, with its attachments, its adhesions. Okay. And then antimicrobial, any of the berberine containing herbs. Now that would be golden seal, that would be all your barberries, even your decorative, like Japanese barberry that's used as a decorative in the US is going to have berberine in the root. It's this yellow alkaloid, very water soluble alkaloid that we can get from that. And the big one here in where I'm at right now, Texas Hill Country, is called algarita. It's Berberis foliolata, and it's called desert barberry. Chinese coptis is another one. Gold thread if you're out on the East Coast, but that's a very small root. It's really, you just can't get enough material from the harvest to really use that. Golden seal is so over harvested and at risk. I don't even use it anymore, but I certainly use a lot. I use algarita probably more than anything because it's got such a high density of berberine in it. And this berberine, so back to what I was talking about with cholera, this is where berberine first became famous. Was in Calcutta, I believe it was, in the late 60s. There was a huge cholera outbreak, and something like 1.5 million people died over a period of almost a year. And this was in the heyday of penicillin, and penicillin wasn't even touching it, right? It did nothing. And then neighborhood by neighborhood, they started using golden seal, and it was just drying the cholera up, completely. And so this became where they started studying, and this is golden seal, or I'm sorry, berberine and hydrostine also were two constituents out of the thousands of constituents that we have, in any plant. These were two that started really being studied, and now berberine is really taken off as, again, kind of a nutraceutical, supplement type of herb, and a lot of functional medicine docs use it for cardiovascular stuff. If you can do a liposomal encapsulation of it, you can get more of it to the bloodstream. Generally, it's more of a gut herb, that you take if you take it orally, because only about 0.5% berberine into the bloodstream from the gut, from the small intestine. So what that means is, you have to have other ways of being able to get it into the bloodstream if you're using it for things like cardiovascular health. It's very good for like endothelial repair, for people with atherosclerosis, cardiovascular disease, and so forth. But primarily what we're talking about here is just its astringent and anti-inflammatory properties to the gut is pretty incredible, actually. So it's an amazing herb, and it's also very antimicrobial, specifically, for some of these bacteria. So we're going to find berberine containing herbs, and this would also include Mahonia species, so like Oregon grape, all the different Oregon grapes, leatherleaf and prostate Oregon grape, all the different ones that are out there are all going to contain that yellow alkaloid. If you pull up the root or even just dig a little bit of the stem or the stem close to the ground, you're going to see how yellow it is. Okay, and then anti-inflammation and just basically tonifying that gut mucosa. Marshmallow root is fantastic for that. Licorice root is fantastic for that. Plantain is pretty good. Chamomile is also more of a carminative, honestly, but it's also pretty good at calming down the gut. So these are things that we could consider as well. And then anti-cramping, we're going to talk, not crapping, although that too, but anti-cramping. These are a few. We want smooth muscle relaxants sometimes, and there are some really good ones that I don't have listed here, like lobelia and soak tassel. I think I have soak tassel listed in another slide on as an anti parasitic, which it is, but it's also a really strong, smooth muscle relaxer. So if we're really having bad cramping, we can look to lobelia and even celery seed and Diarrhea species for our muscle relaxation too. Okay, next slide. Okay, and yeah, here we go. So Giardia is where I was talking about it. So one of the big ones actually is like right in the middle. Castella emorii, which is crucifixion thorn, is famous as an anti-Giardia type herb. But the problem is it's it's difficult to harvest correctly, and you're not going to find it online or anything. And it's a Southwest herb. You're going to find it in like Southern California and Arizona and South, even Texas, closer to the border, and West Texas. You're going to find it. And it's one of those plants that if a person doesn't harvest it right, it kills the plant. But it's an amazing anti-parasitic for Giardia. I've used it for that and been incredibly successful. That includes for dogs too. Um, Neem, of course, sweet annie, wormwood are pretty well known for that. Juglans nigra, which is our black walnut, I use the leaf normally of black walnut for wound repair and it's a very strong antibacterial and also a biofilm disruptor. But the whole is what I generally use for internal. It's stronger and it's got higher percentages of juglone in it, which is a really strong antiparasitic as well, and an antibacterial for that matter. And then here at the bottom we see the Giardia that I was talking about. That's the silk tassel. That's the smooth muscle relax as well. And yes, the question is when you say neem, is this the same as neem oil? Absolutely. It is the same neem that we're taking that from. We're using the leaf of that and extracting that. And I usually do that in a 40 to 50% alcohol extraction. So, hydroethanolic, so 50% alcohol, 50% water works pretty well for that with some heat, about 130 degrees for 4 hours. And then diffuser pulls that out pretty good, really well actually. And yes, that is the same as we're using for the neem oil, like for and we use for like gum health and so forth in the mouth. Yes. Valerian, most people think of as soporific, as an herb that helps us sleep, and it does, but it's a really strong antiparasitic, even more so than, in my opinion. And the thing with valerian is one of those that's not always consistent for sleeping, and as a nervine. There's some people that respond opposite, a very small percentage, but there's some people that it just hypes them up. It's like Ritalin being used to calm down kids who are hyperactive back in the day, right? It's sort of like this opposite effect. But as an anti-parasitic, especially for single-celled parasite, I feel like it's extremely good. Okay, next slide. Oh yeah, so here we go to more maintenance afterwards, right? Probiotics, we could certainly give probiotics during the acute phase of this, but most of it takes time for the probiotics to take hold, and you're gonna be probably eliminating a lot of that, of what you're taking in here. So it's really more of the recovery side that we're talking about that, and certainly for the prebiotics, there is potentially, probably, I don't know how much research there is on this, but there's probably situations where prebiotics are going to feed your pathogenic bacteria, right? And so for that reason, I wouldn't recommend prebiotics during the acute phase of, let's say, something that we pretty much suspect is a bacterial gastrointestinal infection. Okay, next slide. We may be getting just about close to the end. Okay, so then just here's kind of like some general table. I love tables, and this is just kind of a general table to give you an idea, comparing some of the herbs we talked about, what we would use them for, and so forth. All right, next slide. This may be the last slide, actually, I can't remember. Okay, yeah, so just a summary here. This is the last one. Um, this is what I would have to say. You can read this as well as I can, but this is, I think that the severity and of course, as you all know this already, the symptomology and what is this case looking like is going to determine what we're going to do. But first and foremost, of course, we're going to try to make sure that our patient stays hydrated and is able to function, and gets rest. I've had had GI infection literally like stop one of our herbal medics clinics, one of our very first ones, and it was a really big lesson to me when we changed actually the structure of how we would form our teams based on this. And we have now always we have rotating through our interns and students that are part of an herbal medics outreach, where we work with underserved. We always have medics for the medics now that are always checking in, because the lack of doing that took one of our students out completely because he just had nonstop. He had some kind of a bacterial infection that he picked up from the water. This was one of our water purification in Nicaragua, one of our very first ones. And were doing slow sand water filtration, and we were doing free herbal clinics at the same time. And we were treating like 100 people a day, and families were coming back the next day. And it was just got more and more crowded, and there was just so much work going on. And this particular team member just kind of got overlooked, and he ended up being very sick. We ended up getting him back to town and just giving him Cipro basically, and that took care of it. But by the time we were able to do something about it, it was already almost too late. So really, you really have to stay on these, of course, if you're the medic on an expeditionary team or whatever that may be. You've really got to stay on top of things and watch your people and prevent as much as possible and treat as early as possible, right? So I think that pretty much summarizes what I had to say tonight. Happy to take any questions here.
Thank you so much again, Sam. That was amazing. There's a reason you're a crowd favorite. We love hearing from you.
Thank you. I appreciate that. Anybody have any questions off of what I talked about? Feel free to ask.
Um, Thank you again, Sam, so much, as we've already said many times, for coming back and sharing your immense knowledge with all of us. We're going to open the floor to questions, but before we do so, I'd like to do our big giveaway of the night, which is a copy of Sam's book to one attendee tonight. Before I do that, I'm going to drop a link in the chat so that everybody can go check out his book as well as the website. And if you like what you heard tonight, definitely look into their structured academic offerings if you want to learn more about how to prepare these yourselves or anything more in depth. My mind's always blown.
We do have a few questions that I'm seeing in the chat. One says, "I'm curious what your medic kit." Oops, sorry, my thing scrolled. I'm curious what your medic kit looks like for expedition or backpacking. Is one of them.
Yeah. So I've got a packing list that I first, of course, have a store and apothecary I call it the backpacker's apothecary as well. We sell these kits. It's herbalfirstaidgear.com if anybody's interested in looking at our products, but I'm happy to upload or to give y'all. I can send it to you an email if you want, and I don't know if you do downloads off of your stuff, or if you want to send it out, be happy to do that. And that's got all the formulas that they're kind of the center of our formula herbal formulas, and it's got all the herbs on it and description of what each herb does in the formula, that are kind of the most for any of our outreach programs, that we always have those. We have a lot of other stuff too, but those are always the central ones that we're always going to use. And then the other thing is packaging that is always done in Nalgene or high density plastic, usually of some type, and that's safe. That's food safe, of course. Even if you heat it, it's still food safe. There's some really good research on that that shows you can heat it up to 150 degrees and you still don't get any leaching. Not that you're going to be doing that, but glass is just like you can't do it. It's absolutely, you can't. And then those, like a lot of people, if you go to the store and you buy tinctures or whatever, you're going to have those little droppers with the rubber tops, and those are horrible. You expose those to UV, and in two hours of UV, your whole tincture is going to taste like rubber, and they're horrible for dosing as well. Whereas in Nalgene, you have caps, and you can dose off that, especially working with populations maybe that are completely illiterate. Like literally, you have to draw pictures, morning, noon, and night, like a rising sun, a noon sun, and a night sun 3 times, and it's one cap full or whatever, and that you can do very easily, versus those droppers are ridiculous. It's like, okay, take 3 droppers, per dose, and it's like, well, is that 3 drops, a whole drop? It only fills about half. It's just to get good precise dosages. I always go by half teaspoon and teaspoon and so forth. And those caps usually fit right into like a 5 ml cap for the 4 ounces and so forth. And so you can really adjust your dosages much better that way too. And the packaging is everything. And of course, it's much lighter weight, obviously, too, to be able to take stuff to the field that way. We also do backpackers apothecary of like honeys that are infused. And then my recent thing I started a couple years ago is freeze dried formulas. It's a long process, but I've got several formulas that I freeze dry that literally weigh like grams versus many ounces for the same thing, for this concentrated freeze dried version of the formula. It's hard because you got to remove the alcohol first, and then you got to freeze, and then you freeze dry it, and it's just all these steps. But we sell that stuff too, and I love that, because you can just put a tiny little chunk of this freeze dried formula into your tea or whatever. You're starting to feel like you're getting sick out where you're backpacking or whatever. You got an upper respiratory thing going on, and it's just a tiny little chunk that weighs literally nothing. It's like you're putting 1/3 of a gram into your cup, and that's your dosage. So that's another way to consider for the field.
Excellent. So I'd like to take a pause in our Q&A, and I'm going to share my screen, and we're going to do our big giveaway right now. So give me a second to pull up our random name selector.
While she's doing that, I just have to say that hearing you say that, I think we all need you in our life for like everything. That's amazing that you can do that. I've learned so much from you tonight.
Okay, here we
Thank
go.
you.
Must be present to win. Please come off mute or type something right away in the chat so that we know you're here and we don't skip over you to the next. Lee Burton. Is Lee here, or do you see anything in the chat? Going once, going twice. All right, let's spin the wheel.
Oh, he's here.
Oh,
He's here.
snuck right in there.
Or she's
Awesome. All right, Lee, go ahead and email us at wildmedwednesday@gmail.com with and I'll get you connected with Sam so that we can get you a copy of the book. Congratulations. If you have any questions for Sam as well about his prior experiences, his journey to where he's at in his career now, including prior military experience, or perhaps treatment scenarios where he's encountered some of these situations in real life, we welcome you to pick his brain. He also has a new book out now called Survival Gardening. I bought Sam's other book a long time ago, and before we opened the room to everyone to come in tonight, he told me about this, so I've already got it queued up for purchase. So join me. Maybe we can have a book club about it. Get real nerdy. I had something else I was going to say, but I don't remember. So carry on, everyone. Did we have any questions in the chat, Leanne? I think Sam did a really good job of addressing those in real
Yeah,
time.
he was faster than, I mean, you were so fast, Sam. You're on it. We love it. And it just looks like admiration in the chat, and people really enjoyed hearing you speak.
If anybody
Thank you.
else has experiences with treating these things, especially in the field, we also welcome you to come off mute or in the chat and share your experiences and what treatments you provided, because we'd love to compare experiences. Sam, I was very intrigued about activated charcoal for wounds. My day job is vascular surgery, which by extension deals with a lot of wounds, and we help staff the wound clinic and stuff. So I'm gonna go back to work on Monday and start picking everybody's brain about charcoal.
Awesome. Yeah. Yeah, it's fantastic. I mean, infections, it's something and it's so lightweight and easy to carry in the field, you know. It's just
Yeah.
it's interesting. Abrik O'Kelly, I mentioned of the founder of COROM, the Colorado offshore is JSOM is a wound vac using syringe, a field expedient wound vac that you can make and get better pressure than we do normally on a regular wound vac. I guess I can't remember what the pressure he's getting on it, but you know, these are the kinds of austere medicine things that are just so cool. And he's a former Green Beret as well. So you know, we're all, this is always that kind of, you know, anything we can do to innovate medicine in the field is just so exciting to me. I always love that.
Absolutely. To remind you all, the recording will be posted to YouTube in about a week. Sam and I will chat about whether or not a PDF will be available linked to the video or not. It's kind of a case by case basis.
Yeah, I sent you a PDF of the slides and I will send you a PDF of that packing list as well.
And you're okay with me posting that with the YouTube recording?
Absolutely. For anybody that was here, totally. And
Cool.
just email me and remind me. If not, I'll be back out of Texas here on Tuesday. So I can get to you then by then for sure, if not earlier.
Thank you so much.
Real quick, I saw Kevin, you messaged us, or you put in the chat about wanting to be a candidate and wondering how to apply for those. Gina is also really a great resource with that. So I'm going to defer for a second to her.
We give we'll email we schedule in 6-month blocks. It follows an academic calendar, so October to March is one block, and then April through September is the other one. At the end of every 6-month session, we will email every participant a certificate that identifies which of these 6 sessions you attended, and then at that point you can you'll email that certificate to Gabby Glass at the WMS to claim your FOM credits, only if you are an accepted FOM candidate.
Excellent. Thank you.
You're welcome. I know we have a lot of people here who are also interested in COROM or directly affiliated with COROM, so it's really cool to hear that you're doing that, Sam.
Fantastic.
Earlier, I'll post it again, but I posted the email for Sam at the Herbal Medics Academy. They also go by the Human Path. Is the Human Path kind of like your new umbrella organization? It's no longer just Herbal
It's all
Medics
expand. That was Yeah, that was our original name, your herbal,
Oh,
the
okay,
human
cool.
path. And back then, it was a little more, we had a lot more survival oriented type training. Medicine was certainly a big part of it too, but we've really distilled it down to almost even all the survival skills are really more in terms of like what I call my medical advanced party courses, which are, you know, scouting out the epidemiology and learning, you know, ingress and egress to be able to get to set up clinics areas or post-disaster areas or areas that may not even be safe. And so that's kind of where all of it is distilled down to. But at the time, it was the human path, and a lot of people came to us more for just basic wilderness survival and urban survival skills. And then they got all confused because we had so many herbal classes. So we started a separate website, Herbal Medics Academy, and then they're like, well, which is it? So we just slowly shifted over to Herbal Medics Academy. Yeah.
Cool. Is thehumanpathschool@gmail.com still the best email address to reach out with any questions, or is there a different
It
email?
is, yeah. That would be the best way to reach out to the school. And you can always email me and I can forward as well. Kaufman.sam@gmail.
Okay. So I put that contact info in the chat. So if anything comes up for you all after this, please reach out to Sam. As you can tell, he's very congenial and a total nerd about what he does, just like all of us.
Absolutely. All right. Well, thank you, everybody. I'm going to log off then and take care. Thanks for
Good
having me
night,
again.
Sam. Thank you.
Good night.